The war room fell silent as the holographic display showed another star system turning red. That made 72 systems lost to the Dominion in just 18 months. Admiral of the High Command stood before the gathered representatives, his blue-scaled face showing the exhaustion that all of them felt. "We have 6 weeks," he said. "Perhaps less. The Dominion will reach the core worlds, and when they do, everything we have built across 10,000 years will end." The chamber held representatives from 47 different species. Some had tentacles, others had wings or shells or bodies made of living crystal. All of them shared the same expression of defeat. The Dominion had never lost a battle. Their ships were centuries ahead of anything the Coalition possessed. Their weapons tore through shields like paper. Their soldiers felt no fear, no mercy, no hesitation. Commander stood in the back of the room with the other human delegates. Humanity was still considered young among the galactic species. They had only joined the Coalition 3 centuries ago, and many of the older races still treated them like children at an adult's table, but had studied the old records. She had read the classified files that most humans had forgotten existed, and she knew something that might change everything. She raised her hand. The Admiral looked at her with barely hidden annoyance. "The human delegation wishes to speak." "I do," Admiral stepped forward, feeling the eyes of 100 different species upon her. "I want to ask about the Prometheus." Laughter filled the chamber. Not cruel laughter, but the kind of laughter adults give when a child says something foolish. They clicked their mandibles in amusement. The massive elders shook their great heads slowly. Even some of the human delegates looked embarrassed. "A charming fairy tale," Admiral said. "I had heard that humans tell stories about a ghost ship that appears when all hope is lost, but we are facing real enemies with real weapons. We do not have time for myths." Felt her face grow hot, but she did not back down. "The oldest records in the human archives mention it. A ship built during our 1st century among the stars. A vessel so powerful that it was hidden away because it was too dangerous," the Admiral interrupted. "Yes, we know the story. Every species has legends about secret weapons that could save them in their darkest hour. They are fantasies, Commander, nothing more." Opened her mouth to argue, but then she noticed something strange. In the far corner of the room, an ancient being sat perfectly still. The Seraph Observer had been alive for longer than most civilizations had existed. It rarely spoke, rarely moved, rarely showed any emotion at all. But right now, as mentioned the Prometheus, the Observer had stopped breathing entirely. The meeting continued without her. More arguments about fleet positions, more debates about evacuation routes, more acceptance of inevitable defeat. Barely heard any of it. She kept watching the Observer, and the Observer kept staring at her with eyes that held secrets older than stars. After the summit ended, walked alone through the station's corridors. Harmony's Edge had been built as a symbol of galactic unity, its architecture blending elements from 100 different worlds. Now it felt like a monument to failure. In 6 weeks, it would probably be debris. "You know more than you should." Spun around. The Seraph Observer stood behind her, though she had not heard any footsteps. Up close, the being looked even older. Its skin was like ancient paper, its eyes like dying suns. The Prometheus said, "It's real, isn't it?" The Observer did not answer directly. Instead, it asked a question of its own. "How much do you know about what your species buried on Titan's 7th moon?" His heart began to beat faster. "Nothing is buried on Titan's 7th moon. That location doesn't exist in any official records." "Precisely." The Observer moved closer, and its voice dropped to a whisper like wind through dead stars. "Your ancestors were wise to hide it. They were wise to be afraid of it, but wisdom and fear are luxuries that the dying cannot afford." "Can it stop the Dominion?" The Observer was quiet for a long moment. "The Prometheus has only been used once. In that single deployment, it did not merely defeat an enemy. It erased them, every ship, every planet, every trace that they had ever existed, billions of years of evolution undone in an instant. Your ancestors carried that guilt for generations. They swore the ship would never fly again. Felt cold despite the station's controlled temperature. Then, why are you telling me this? Because the alternative is extinction. The observer placed something in her hand. It was a small crystal, warm to the touch. These are coordinates, a location that exists in no database, a ship that has been waiting for 300 years. Go there, see for yourself what humanity created in its youth, and then decide if you are willing to pay the price for salvation. The observer turned to leave, but grabbed its arm. The ancient being's skin felt like touching history itself. "Why me?" she asked. "Why not tell the council? Why not bring this to the whole coalition?" The observer looked at her with something that might have been sadness. Because the Prometheus was built by humans, it can only be operated by humans, and it requires a captain who is willing to carry a burden that would break most minds. The observer pulled free from her grip. "The coalition has spent 3 centuries dismissing your species as young and reckless, but I remember what humanity was before it learned to be cautious. I remember the fire that burned in your eyes when you first reached the stars. That fire never truly went out. It was merely waiting for the right moment to blaze again." Looked at the crystal in her hand. It pulsed with a soft light, almost like a heartbeat. "The ship has been calling to certain humans," the observer continued. "In their dreams, they see corridors of black metal. They hear whispers in languages that died before their son was born. They wake with the feeling that something vast is waiting for them. You have had these dreams, Commander. I can see it in your eyes." Could not deny it. For months, she had dreamed of a ship larger than anything she had ever seen, floating in an endless darkness. She had told herself it was just stress, just her mind processing the fear that everyone felt as the Dominion advanced. Now she understood. It had been a summons. "How do I find the others?" she asked. The observer smiled and for a moment saw the ghost of the powerful being it had once been. "You do not need to find them. They are already on their way. The Prometheus has been patient for 3 centuries, but now that it has awakened, it is calling its crew home." The observer walked away, its footsteps making no sound on the metal floor. Stood alone in the corridor, holding a crystal that contained coordinates to humanity's darkest secret and greatest hope. She had a choice to make. She could ignore everything she had learned and wait for the end like everyone else. Or she could follow a myth into the unknown and discover whether humanity's oldest legend could become its miracle. Thought about the 72 systems that had already fallen. She thought about the billions who had died. She thought about the 6 weeks that remained before everything ended. Then she walked to the shuttle bay and began plotting a course for a moon that officially did not exist. The journey took 11 days through regions of space that appeared on no map. Shuttle jumped from one hidden waypoint to another, following the coordinates stored in the crystal. Each time she emerged from faster-than-light travel, she found herself more alone than before. No stations, no ships, no signals of any kind, just empty space and distant stars that seemed to watch her with cold curiosity. On the 11th day, she arrived at a system that should not have existed. A dying red star, 3 barren planets, and an asteroid field that stretched for millions of kilometers. Her instruments detected nothing unusual, but the crystal in her hand was burning hot now, pulsing with urgency, and trusted it more than she trusted her sensors. She flew into the asteroid field, navigating between rocks the size of cities. The journey took hours, and then, hidden in the heart of that spinning maze of stone, she found it. The Prometheus was 15 kilometers long. Had seen dreadnoughts before. She had walked the corridors of the Coalition's largest vessels. None of them had prepared her for this. The ship was so large that it bent the space around it, creating subtle distortions that made her eyes water if she looked too long. Its hull was black, not the black of paint or metal, but the black of the void between galaxies, an absence of light so complete that it seemed to drink in everything around it. Strange patterns covered the surface, geometric shapes that shifted when viewed directly, becoming different shapes when seen from the corner of the eye. Felt a pressure in her mind, as if the ship was examining her, deciding whether she was worthy of its attention. A docking bay opened without any signal from her shuttle. She flew inside, her hands trembling on the controls, and landed on a platform that looked like it had been cleaned yesterday despite being 3 centuries old. A man was waiting for her. He was old, perhaps the oldest human she had ever seen. His skin was weathered like ancient leather and his eyes held the weight of generations. But he stood straight and strong, and when he spoke, his voice was clear. "Commander, I am Samuel, the last of the keepers. We have been expecting you." Stepped out of her shuttle and looked around. The docking bay was massive, large enough to hold 100 vessels, but only her small shuttle occupied it. The walls curved upward into shadows that her lights could not penetrate. "The keepers," she said, "you've been guarding this ship." "For 12 generations." Samuel began walking and followed. "My ancestors were among those who built the Prometheus. When they saw what it could do, they made a vow. The ship would be preserved, it would be protected, it would be ready, but it would never fly again unless the survival of everything depended upon it." They passed through corridors of black metal, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Every few meters, lights flickered to life as they approached, then died behind them, as if the ship was waking from a long sleep. "I read the classified files," said. "They mentioned the Prometheus was built to fight something called the Harvester Plague, but the details were corrupted." Samuel stopped walking. For a moment he looked infinitely tired. The Harvesters were a sickness that spread between worlds, biological machines that consumed organic life and used it to build more of themselves. They were dying. The species they had first infected had found a cure, but in their desperation they targeted a peaceful civilization called the Axiom. "I've never heard of them." "No one has, that is the point." Samuel resumed walking. "The Axiom were mathematicians. They had spent millions of years studying the fundamental equations of existence. They understood how reality worked at its deepest levels, but they had no weapons, no soldiers, no way to defend themselves. They reached out to the young species who had just joined the galactic community, begging for help." "Humanity." "Yes, your ancestors were new to the stars, but they were clever and they were brave. They looked at the problem and realized that conventional weapons would not be enough. The Harvesters adapted too quickly. They evolved defenses against anything that was used against them. So humanity built something unconventional." They reached a massive door that stretched from floor to ceiling. Samuel placed his hand against it, and patterns of light spread across the surface like veins coming to life. "The Prometheus does not fight within the normal rules of physics," he explained. "It remembers how space was before the universe decided on its laws. When it fires its primary weapon, it convinces reality to forget its current rules. For a brief moment, cause and effect become suggestions rather than requirements." The door opened, and stepped into a command center that took her breath away. 7 seats surrounded a central platform. Holographic displays showed systems she could not understand, and through the massive windows at the front, she could see the asteroid field rotating slowly around them. "We used it once against the Harvesters," Samuel continued. "We meant to quarantine them to trap them in a bubble of altered reality where they could not spread. But the weapon was too powerful. When we fired, we did not just destroy the Harvesters. We erased them from existence. They never happened. Every world they touched, every trace of their passage, gone as if they had never been." Felt a chill run through her. "And the Axiom, did you save them?" Samuel's eyes grew wet. "The Axiom were connected to the Harvesters through the infection. When we erased the Harvesters, the paradox we created unmade the Axiom as well. A peaceful species of mathematicians, billions of individuals who had never harmed anyone, erased from reality because we did not understand our own weapon. That's why you hid the ship. That's why we swore it would never fly again. Samuel walked to one of the 7 seats and rested his hand on its back. The guilt nearly destroyed early humanity. We had meant to save the axiom, and instead we wiped them from existence. We told ourselves we were protectors, and we became destroyers. The keepers were formed to make sure that mistake could never happen again. Walked to the central platform. She could feel the ship humming around her, a vast intelligence that had been sleeping for centuries but was now fully awake. Can we control it this time? Can we use it against the Dominion without another catastrophe? Perhaps the ship's systems have been studied for 300 years. We understand them better now, but there is still a cost. Samuel joined her at the platform. The Prometheus requires a crew of exactly 7. Humans only. The ship's neural architecture was grown from human DNA and cannot accept other species. Each crew member will be connected to the ship's consciousness. They will share its thoughts, its memories, its guilt. The guilt of the axiom. Yes, the ship remembers everyone it has erased. It carries their echoes like ghosts. Those echoes will pass to the crew. They will remember people who no longer exist. They will mourn civilizations that were unmade, and they will carry that weight forever. Understood now why the observer had said the burden would break most minds. How do we find 6 others willing to bear that weight? Samuel smiled for the first time since she had arrived. They are already on their way. The ship has been calling them in their dreams for months. You are not the only one who heard the whispers in the dark, Commander. 6 others have been pulled toward this place, driven by visions they do not understand. They will arrive soon. As if in response to his words, the ship's sensors detected something. 6 vessels, approaching from different directions, converging on this hidden location. Watched the display as 6 tiny lights grew closer. 6 strangers who had never met, drawn together by dreams of a ship that should not exist. She did not know their names or their stories. She did not know if they would be able to work together or if they would fall apart under the weight of what was coming. But she knew one thing for certain. The Prometheus was waking up, and the galaxy was about to learn that humanity's oldest legend was very, very real. Samuel stood beside her, watching the approaching ships. Are you ready to be their captain? Thought about the 72 fallen systems. She thought about the 6 weeks that remained. She thought about the billions of lives that depended on choices she had not yet made. No, she admitted, but I don't think that matters anymore. Samuel nodded, as if that was exactly the right answer. The best captains never feel ready. They simply refuse to let fear make their decisions for them. The first of the 6 ships entered the docking bay, straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and went to meet her crew. They arrived one by one over the next 6 hours. 6 strangers who had never met, yet recognized each other instantly from the dreams they had shared. Watched them step off their vessels with the same expression of wonder and fear that she had felt when she first saw the Prometheus. They looked at each other with eyes that said, "You dreamed it too." The first was a man in his 50s with gray at his temples and a military bearing that could not be hidden beneath civilian clothes. He introduced himself as a former admiral of the Coalition fleet, recognized the name. He had been one of the most celebrated commanders in the service until the Battle of Cygnus Prime, where his entire command had been lost to the Dominion. The official reports called it an unavoidable tragedy. The unofficial whispers called it a failure. Had been living in self-imposed exile ever since, trying to drown his guilt in a bottle. The second was a young woman with kind eyes and careful hands. Doctor had been a rising star in xenobiology until she discovered that her research was being used to create weapons. She had quit her position, destroyed her own work, and opened a free clinic on a border world where she treated anyone who needed help without asking questions. She had thought the dreams were just stress. She had almost not come. The third was a boy. Felt her heart clench when she saw him. Daishi was only 19, but he moved with the caution of someone much older. He had been captured by the Dominion when they invaded his colony and forced to work in one of their labor camps. He was the only survivor when coalition forces finally liberated it. He had an engineer's mind, brilliant and precise, but his eyes held shadows that no teenager should carry. The fourth was a woman in religious robes. Sister had served as a military chaplain for 20 years. She had held the hands of thousands of dying soldiers, offered comfort in the last moments of countless lives, and somehow still believed in mercy. She was quiet and steady, with a presence that made others feel calm even in crisis. When asked why she had come, simply said, "Because someone will need to remind us that we are still human." The fifth was a man who arrived with suspicion in every line of his body. Jackson, to anyone who knew him, was a smuggler and a con artist with a genius-level intellect that he had spent his entire life hiding behind cynicism. He had escaped justice on a dozen worlds and stolen from people who deserved to be stolen from. He did not know why he had followed the dreams to this place. He did not trust anyone who said they knew either. The sixth was a pilot. Lieutenant had served with distinction until a battle that should have killed her. Emergency resuscitation brought her back, but something had changed. She had died twice more in the following years, each time returning from the darkness with less fear and less attachment to living. She did not want to die again. She just no longer remembered what it felt like to be afraid of it. Samuel gathered them in the command center. 7 seats in a circle, 7 strangers who would need to become a crew, one ship that could end a war or end everything. "You all know why you're here," began. "The dreams showed you this place. The Prometheus called to you." "It's a nice story," said, leaning against a console with his arms crossed. "But I've learned not to trust things that seem too convenient. A magical ship that can save the galaxy. 7 chosen ones pulled together by fate. That's the kind of tale you tell children." "And yet here you are," replied. His voice was rough, like he had spent too long without speaking. "You could have ignored the dreams. You chose not to." "Curiosity, nothing more." Doctor shook her head. "That's not true, and you know it. I felt the same thing you did. A pull that couldn't be explained. A certainty that if I didn't come, I would regret it for whatever time we have left." Daisy had not spoken since arriving. Now he looked around the command center with careful eyes. "The ship is real. The power is real. I've been studying the system since I got here. This technology is centuries ahead of anything I've ever seen." "The technology is not the problem," Samuel said. He stood in the center of their circle, his ancient face grave. "The problem is what it costs to use." He explained the axiom. He explained the guilt. He explained the echoes that would live in their minds forever if they chose to serve on the Prometheus. When he finished, the silence was heavy enough to break. Was the first to speak. "Using a weapon that erases people from existence, that doesn't make us better than the Dominion. It makes us the same." "The weapon can be controlled," Samuel replied. "We understand it better now, but even controlled, there will be costs. There will be choices that none of you want to make." "Then why should we make them?" asked. She was sitting in one of the 7 seats, looking comfortable despite the tension. "I've died before. I'm not afraid of dying again, but I need to know that it means something." Sister had been silent, her eyes closed as if in prayer. Now she opened them. 70 billion people have already died. If we do nothing, the number will be trillions. Sometimes the choice is not between good and bad. It is between terrible and worse. "Easy for a priest to say," muttered. "You can just claim God told you what to do." "God has never told me anything," replied calmly. "I listen for the voice, but I only hear silence. I believe anyway. That is what faith means, acting in the absence of certainty." Watched her potential crew argue. She saw wrestling with guilt that had nearly destroyed him. She saw cynicism fighting against his desperate need to believe in something. She saw Daisy's quiet determination, his gentle compassion, his peaceful acceptance, and steady faith. They were broken people, all of them. Life had damaged them in different ways. left scars that would never fully heal, but broken people knew something that the whole ones didn't. They knew how to keep going after everything fell apart. She walked to the main control station and activated a holographic display. The galaxy appeared before them, with 72 systems marked in red. The Dominions advance. The trail of worlds that no longer existed. "I won't give you a speech about duty," said. "I won't talk about sacrifice or glory or any of the things that recruiters say to make young people volunteer for wars. The truth is simpler than that." She expanded the display, showing the projections for what would happen if the Dominion wasn't stopped. Core worlds falling, refugee fleets scattered, species dying one by one until nothing remained. In 6 weeks, everything we know will end. Every world, every people, every hope for the future gone. The coalition can't stop it. Their fleets can't stop it. Nothing can stop it except us. She looked at each of them in turn. "I'm not asking you to be heroes. I'm asking you to be the people you wished existed when you were at your lowest moment. When everything seemed hopeless, didn't you wish that someone would appear to save you? Someone who would stand up when everyone else sat down?" Daishi looked at the floor. He was thinking about the labor camp, about the moment he had given up hope, about the coalition soldiers who had finally come. "We have a chance to be those people," continued. "Not perfect people, not fearless people, just ordinary broken people who refuse to let the galaxy end without a fight." Stood up slowly. His eyes were still haunted, but something else was there now, something that looked like purpose. "I lost my entire command at Cygnus Prime, 3,000 men and women who trusted me, dead because I made the wrong choice. I've been running from that guilt ever since." He walked to one of the 7 seats and sat down. "Maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to make a choice that matters." One by one, the others followed. Doctor took her seat with the careful precision of a surgeon. Sister bowed her head briefly before sitting, as if receiving a blessing, simply dropped into her chair with a pilot's casual grace. Daishi hesitated at the last moment, then squared his shoulders and sat with the determination of someone twice his age. Only remained standing. He looked at the 6 people who had chosen to risk everything, then at the holographic display of the dying galaxy. "This is insane," he said. "You know that, right? We're 7 damaged people on a 300-year-old ship going to fight an enemy that has never lost a battle." "Yes," agreed. Was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face. "Well, I've always been terrible at making smart choices." He took the last seat. Samuel stepped back, watching them with eyes that glistened with tears. "The Prometheus is yours now. May you find a way to bear the weight that my ancestors could not." The ship hummed around them, systems awakening, power building. After 300 years of silence, the legend was ready to fly again. Looked at her crew, her broken, beautiful, impossible crew, and felt something she had not felt since the war began. "Hope. Set course for the nebula," she said. "We have a war to end." The Prometheus emerged from hiding like a creature waking from a long sleep. Its engines burned with light that sensors could not properly read, and its passage through space left ripples that every advanced civilization in the galaxy could detect. The Seraph observer, monitoring from a station light-years away, whispered a single word: "Finally." On the bridge, felt the ship's consciousness brush against her mind. It was not invasive, more like standing near a fire and feeling its warmth. But within that warmth she sensed something else. Memories, grief, the weight of 300 years of waiting and remembering. They had 72 hours to reach the nebula, where the Dominion's main fleet was gathering for the final assault on the core worlds. 72 hours to become a crew. 72 hours to prepare for the impossible. The echoes began on the first night. Woke from a dream that was not her own. She had been standing in a library that stretched to infinity, surrounded by equations that floated in the air like poetry. Other beings moved around her, tall and slender, with skin like polished silver and eyes that contained galaxies. They spoke in mathematics, and she understood every word. She opened her eyes in her cabin aboard the Prometheus, her heart pounding. The axiom. She had dreamed of the axiom. At breakfast in the ship's common room, she saw that the others looked just as shaken, stared at his food without eating. Doctor had dark circles under her eyes. Even, who usually hid everything behind jokes, was quiet and pale. "You saw them too," said. "It was not a question." Daishi nodded slowly. "I was in one of their schools, children learning to calculate the movements of stars. They were so happy, so peaceful." "The ship is sharing its memories with us," Doctor explained. She had spent the early morning studying the Prometheus's biological systems. It carries the echoes of everyone it erased. The axiom, the harvesters, all of them are stored in its neural matrix. Now that we're connected to it, we experience those echoes too. "That's what the keepers meant about carrying the weight," said. "We're going to remember people who no longer exist. We're going to mourn civilizations that were unmade." Pushed his food away. "I already have enough ghosts, I don't need more." "None of us need more," replied gently. "But sometimes we're not given what we need, we're given what's necessary." The hours passed. They trained with the ship systems, learning how to work together. Took to the piloting controls as if she had been born for them, making the Prometheus dance through space with impossible grace. Daishi and worked on the engineering systems, their different minds complementing each other, Daishi's precision and creativity finding solutions that neither could reach alone. Doctor monitored their psychological states, watching for signs that the echoes were becoming too much. Moved through the ship like a steady presence, offering words of comfort when needed and silence when that was better. And worked on tactics. They studied the Dominion's patterns, their formations, their methods of attack. The enemy was a collective consciousness, billions of organic minds linked to a central machine intelligence that made decisions with perfect efficiency. They felt no fear, no doubt, no hesitation. Every ship in their fleet moved as one. "That's their strength," said, "but it might also be their weakness. If we can disrupt the central consciousness, the individual ships might become confused." "Might," repeated. "A lot of our plan depends on might. The whole war depends on might. We might survive, we might win, we might save everyone." Met his eyes. "The alternative is certain extinction. I'll take might over never." On the second night, the echoes became stronger. Dreamed of being a harvester, a biological machine driven by instinct and hunger, consuming everything in its path. She felt no guilt, no remorse, only the endless need to spread and grow. She woke up screaming, her throat raw, her hands shaking. Found her in the observation lounge, staring at the stars streaming past. "The harvesters were dying," she said without turning around. "They were sick and desperate. That's why they attacked the axiom. They weren't evil, they were afraid." "Does that make it better or worse?" "I don't know." She finally looked at him. "I always thought enemies were simple. Good people over here, bad people over there. But the harvesters were just trying to survive. They did terrible things, but they did them out of fear." Sat down beside her. "The Dominion isn't afraid. They don't feel anything. They just consume and grow because that's what they were designed to do. Then maybe they're easier to fight." "Maybe," was quiet for a moment. "At Cygnus Prime, I made a choice. I sent my people into what I thought was a safe position. But the Dominion had set a trap. They surrounded us, cut us off, and destroyed us piece by piece. I survived because my crew pushed me into an escape pod against my orders." Waited. She could feel how much it cost him to speak these words. "Every night since then I dream about their faces. 3,000 people who trusted me, who believed I would keep them safe." His voice cracked slightly. "Now I'm dreaming about silver people and mathematical libraries, and somehow it's not worse than what I already carry. It's just more." "Is that why you came? To make up for Cygnus Prime?" I came because I need to believe that my life can still mean something, that all those deaths weren't for nothing, that maybe, if I can help save the galaxy, the equation balances somehow. Put her hand on his arm. It doesn't work that way. The past is the past. You can't trade new victories for old losses. I know, covered her hand with his, but I can try to be the commander my crew believed I was, not perfect, just better. On the third day, Doctor made a discovery that changed everything. She had been studying the ship's biological systems, trying to understand exactly how the main weapon worked. What she found sent her running to the command center. It doesn't erase things, she said, her words tumbling over each other in excitement. Not really. The Prometheus shifts things to a parallel dimensional state, a kind of cosmic quarantine. The axiom, they're not gone. They're waiting, in a place outside normal space-time, preserved but unreachable. The crew gathered around her display. Complex equations filled the screen, but Daishi's eyes widened as he began to understand. If they're preserved, he said slowly, then theoretically they could be released. Not with current technology, but yes, theoretically, someone could find a way to bring them back. Felt hope and fear battling in her chest. Can we use this? Can we modify the weapon? Doctor nodded. I think so. Instead of erasing the Dominion, we could quarantine their collective consciousness, trap it outside reality while leaving the enslaved species free. The bodies would survive. Only the controlling intelligence would be removed. Laughed, a real laugh for the first time since they had left. We could save everyone, even the species the Dominion has absorbed. Everyone except the consciousness that controls them. The room erupted in excited discussion. They had a chance, a real chance, to win without becoming the monsters they were fighting. But Daishi remained quiet. He was studying the equations with an engineer's careful eye, and his expression grew troubled. There's a problem, he said. The modification requires manual calibration from inside the ship's core. Someone has to physically adjust the dimensional frequency while the weapon fires. Doctor's excitement faded. The core is filled with exotic radiation. No human could survive in there for more than a few minutes. I know, Daishi's voice was steady, even as his hands trembled slightly. But I'm the only one with the engineering skills to do it, and the calibration will take at least 10 minutes. Silence fell over the room. Everyone understood what he was saying. No, his voice was sharp. We'll find another way. There is no other way, not in the time we have. Daishi looked at her with eyes far too old for his 19 years. I've been living on borrowed time since I escaped the camps. I watched everyone I loved die while I survived. I've never understood why I made it out and they didn't. He stood and for a moment saw the man he would have become in a better world. Maybe this is why. Maybe I survived so I could be here now for this. Let me make it count. Moved to his side and took his hand. She didn't try to talk him out of it. She simply held on, offering her presence as comfort. We still have time, said. We'll keep looking for alternatives. Yes, Daishi agreed. But if we don't find one, I need you to let me do this. Promise me. Looked at the youngest member of her crew, this boy who had suffered too much and still found the courage to offer everything. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to find another way. She wanted to save him the way no one had saved his family. But she had learned, in the long months of this war, that commanders sometimes had to accept sacrifices they could not bear. I promise, she whispered. Daishi smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his face. Then we have a plan. Now let's go end this war. The Prometheus accelerated toward the nebula. Ahead of them, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history waited. 40,000 Dominion ships, billions of enslaved minds, a collective consciousness that had never known defeat. And behind them, a dying galaxy watched and waited, hoping that a myth could become their miracle. The nebula burned with the light of 40,000 warships. The Dominion had gathered every vessel, every weapon, every absorbed species into a single massive fleet. They had done this because their collective consciousness had recognized the Prometheus from ancient data archives, records that had been considered corrupted myths until now. For the first time in its existence, the Dominion experienced something it was never programmed to feel. Fear. Stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching the enemy fleet on the display. Each point of light represented a ship full of enslaved beings, organic minds that had once belonged to free people before the Dominion consumed them. If the modified weapon worked, those people would be free again. If it failed, this would be humanity's last stand. "They're sending a message," reported from the pilot's station. "They want us to surrender." "What's the message?" "Resistance is inefficient. Absorption is inevitable. Survival probability increases by 0.03% if we submit peacefully." Laughed from his engineering console. Only the Dominion would think that's a persuasive argument. Opened a channel to the enemy fleet. "This is commander of the human vessel Prometheus. We reject your offer. We will never submit. And today, one way or another, your war ends." The Dominion's response came in the form of weapons fire. 40,000 ships opened up at once, filling space with more destructive energy than most civilizations produced in a century. The barrage would have vaporized any normal vessel in seconds. The Prometheus was not a normal vessel. Reality bent around the ship as it slipped between dimensions. The enemy fire passed through space where the Prometheus had been a moment before, hitting nothing. When the ship reappeared, it was behind the Dominion's main line, and its weapons were singing. They did not fire conventional blasts. Instead, beams of impossible light touched enemy ships and convinced them that their weapons had never existed. Crews looked in confusion at control panels that suddenly showed no offensive capabilities. Guns that had been firing moments before simply were not there anymore. But the Dominion adapted. Their collective consciousness analyzed the attack patterns and learned to predict where the Prometheus would appear. Coordinated fire began boxing the ship in, limiting its escape routes. Warning lights flashed across the bridge as the first hits landed. "Hull integrity at 93%, Daishi reported. He had taken his position at the engineering station, but everyone knew he was just waiting for the moment when he would have to enter the core. Commanded with a clarity he had not felt in years. The guilt of Cygnus Prime had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled him. He called out tactical adjustments, finding weaknesses in the Dominion's formations, keeping them alive second by second. Doctor worked the biological systems, pushing the ship's living components beyond their intended limits. Sweat dripped down her face as she fought to keep the Prometheus functioning. Sister moved through the ship, treating wounds and steadying hearts. When crew members felt overwhelmed by the echoes of the axiom, she was there with calm words and a steady presence. Found exploits in the Dominion's coordination protocols. His con artist mind saw patterns that military thinkers missed. He fed false data into the enemy network, causing ships to turn on each other, creating moments of chaos that exploited with impossible maneuvers. And flew. She piloted the Prometheus through a storm of weapons fire, dancing with death like an old friend. She had died before. She was not afraid to die again, but she was determined to stay alive long enough to finish the job. An hour into the battle, the tide began to turn against them. Too many ships, too much firepower. The Prometheus was the most powerful vessel ever built, but it was still one ship against an armada. "We can't keep this up," said. "We need to fire the main weapon now." Nodded, she looked at Daishi, and her heart broke at how young he seemed in that moment. "It's time," she said. Daishi stood. He had already said his goodbyes, quiet words to each crew member during the journey here. He had asked to pray for him, not because he believed, but because it meant something to her. He had made promise to use his genius for something worthwhile after the war. He had hugged Doctor and thanked her for trying so hard to find another way. "Tell them I chose this," he said to. "Tell them it was worth it." He walked off the bridge without looking back. The corridors of the Prometheus seemed to welcome him, lights guiding his path to the core. The ship knew what he was about to do. In some strange way, it was grateful. The core was beautiful and terrifying. Energy swirled in patterns that should not exist, colors that had no names, sounds that were not quite sounds. Daishi's radiation suit began failing the moment he entered. He ignored the warnings flashing across his display and got to work. On the bridge, watched his progress on a small screen. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair so hard that her knuckles turned white. "Calibration at 10%, Daishi reported. His voice was steady, even as the radiation ate through his protection. Outside, the battle raged, pulled the Prometheus through maneuvers that should have torn the ship apart, directed fire at critical junctures in the Dominion fleet, screamed warnings about incoming attacks. Doctor pushed the biological systems beyond their breaking point. 30%, Daishi's voice was weaker now. Had stopped moving through the ship. She stood in the chapel, hands clasped, eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayer. 50%, the words came with visible effort. The Dominion seemed to sense that something was happening. Their attacks grew more desperate, more focused. The Prometheus shuddered under impacts that would have destroyed lesser vessels. 70%, Daishi was barely audible now. Opened a channel to the core. "Daishi, stay with me, you're almost there." A faint laugh came back. "I'm still here, Captain, not going anywhere until this is done." 90%. The Dominion's central consciousness finally understood what was happening. It recognized the energy building in the Prometheus. It knew that if that energy was released, everything changed. So it made a decision that it would have considered inefficient under any other circumstances. It sent every remaining ship in a suicide charge at the Prometheus. Thousands of vessels accelerated toward them, weapons firing continuously, willing to die if it meant stopping the weapon from completing its cycle. 100%, Daishi whispered. His last words were so quiet that the comm barely caught them. It was worth it. Closed her eyes for just a moment. Then she opened them and activated the weapon. Light poured from the Prometheus, not the terrible erasing light that had unmade the Axiom 3 centuries ago, but something different, something more precise. The wave expanded outward, passing through every Dominion ship, reaching across the entire nebula and beyond. It did not destroy, it separated. The collective consciousness, the machine-organic intelligence that had enslaved billions, was pulled out of reality. It was not erased but quarantined, trapped in a dimensional space where it could harm no one. The billions of enslaved minds it had controlled were suddenly, shockingly free. Across the nebula, ships stopped firing. Crews looked at each other in confusion, then wonder, then joy. They were themselves again. They remembered who they had been before the Dominion took them. They remembered their worlds, their families, their names. But something else happened too, something unexpected. As the weapon fired, the dimensional walls thinned enough for a moment of contact. The Axiom preserved all these centuries in their parallel prison, sensed the bridge forming. They could not cross back. The gap was too narrow, the physics too unstable, but they could send something through. Knowledge, mathematics, the equations they had spent their existence perfecting, solutions to problems that the galaxy did not yet know how to ask. A gift from a ghost species to the civilizations that still lived. The data flooded into the Prometheus's computers. Doctor gasped as she recognized what it contained. Cures for diseases that had killed billions. Energy solutions that could power worlds forever. Answers to questions that scientists had been asking for. The Axiom could not return, but they had found a way to ensure that their existence meant something. The Prometheus went dark. Its ancient systems, pushed beyond all limits, finally gave out. The vast ship drifted in the nebula, silent and still, its purpose fulfilled. 3 days later, Coalition rescue vessels found them. The 6 survivors were pulled from a ship that had become little more than a memorial, was barely conscious, had a broken arm, had cracked ribs, had a concussion. Doctor was in shock, was the only one still standing, still steady, still praying. They had won. The days that followed were a blur of medical treatment and celebrations and questions that none of them felt ready to answer. The Dominion was gone. The enslaved species were free. The galaxy had been saved by a ship that most people had believed was just a myth. They were called heroes, of course. The 6 of Prometheus, the media named them. Songs were written. Monuments were planned. Children across 1,000 worlds played games where they pretended to be the brave humans who had saved everything. Always corrected people when they called them the 6. There were 7 of us, she said. His name was Daishi. He was 19 years old. He loved mathematics and hated injustice and dreamed of building things that would last forever. He gave his life so that we could win. Remember him. The axiom equations transformed galactic science. Diseases that had killed for centuries were cured within months. Energy became limitless. The Coalition entered a golden age built on the gift from a species that no longer existed, or perhaps still existed, somewhere outside reality, waiting for the day when someone found a way to bring them home. Years passed. The survivors of the Prometheus went their separate ways. Became an ambassador, spending her life ensuring that humanity used its new reputation wisely. Returned to the fleet and trained the next generation, teaching young officers that the best commanders were the ones who never stopped caring about the people they led. Doctor opened a research institute dedicated to healing the damage of war. Founded a memorial order, preserving the memories of all those lost to the Dominion and the Axiom and every other victim of conflicts past. Became a teacher. It surprised everyone who knew him, including himself. But he found that he had a gift for reaching young people who reminded him of himself, brilliant minds that hid behind cynicism and fear. He told them that their greatest power was the ability to carry guilt and still choose hope. Finally learned to live. She settled on a quiet world and built a small house on a cliff overlooking an ocean. Every morning, she watched the sun rise without wondering if it would be her last. She had died 3 times. Now she was learning what it meant to truly be alive. The Prometheus was enshrined in a special museum at the galactic core. Visitors came from every species to see the ship that had been just a myth until it appeared when the universe needed it most. On quiet nights, the museum curators reported hearing something from within the darkened hull. 7 voices, laughing together in a language older than stars. Some said it was a malfunction. Others said it was just the settling of ancient metal. But a few knew the truth. The ship remembered its crew. It remembered the broken people who had become heroes, the sacrifices that had saved a galaxy, and the young engineer who had given everything so that others could live free. In the end, that was humanity's true gift to the galaxy. Not their technology, not their weapons, not even their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. It was their ability to carry impossible burdens and still find reasons to laugh. It was their willingness to break themselves so that others could remain whole. It was their insistence, against all evidence and all reason, on believing that the future could be better than the past. The galaxy had thought humans were young and reckless, too small to matter in the grand story of the cosmos. Now they knew better. Now they knew that the smallest lights sometimes burned the. And now, whenever the darkness seemed too deep and the enemies too strong, they looked to the stars and remembered that somewhere out there, a myth had once become a miracle. Because of 7 ordinary humans who refused to let the universe end without a fight.